Hello everyone, this is John Capadonna and welcome to Growing Large Tomatoes in West Texas. Growing large tomatoes in West Texas can be challenging. Tomatoes are tropical plants and they were domesticated in southern Mexico about 8,000 years ago. In the vicinity of the state of Oaxaca, where tomatoes were domesticated, temperatures are very stable throughout the year. Nighttime temperatures average about 55 degrees, and daytime temperatures average about 82 degrees. Now, large varieties of tomatoes have what I call a genetic memory. Because of that genetic memory of their native habitat, tomatoes have a very narrow temperature range in which they pollinate well. That range is above 50 degrees but below 65 at night, and below 85 degrees during the day. Conditions not unlike those found in southern Mexico. For some reason, that does not apply to cherry tomatoes, which are much more heat tolerant. The chart to the right shows the weather data for the year near Oaxaca. As you can see, the temperatures are nearly ideal year-round. Now, this chart shows the annual weather averages in Midland, which are pretty typical for West Texas. What I want to call your attention to are the months that are above 50 degrees but below 65 at night and below 85 during the day. Those 2 months are April and October. There are probably a few days in May and in November that also meet those parameters. Why is this so important? Well, stay with me a little longer while we go down this botanical rabbit hole. Tomatoes are largely self-fertile. That is, they pollinate themselves about 95% of the time, yet they are not considered self-pollinating by botanists. That is because they require some outside force to move the pollen from the anthers to the stigma. If you look closely at a tomato flower, you will note a conical structure in the center of a flower, and these are the anthers that are fused together, and they enclose the female reproductive structure collectively known as the pistil. The stigma, the sticky part that collects the pollen, is at the very tip or sometimes just outside the pointed end of the cone. Under normal circumstances, it requires the wind, an animal brushing up against the plant, or perhaps vibrations of the wings of an insect to dislodge the pollen so that it passes out the end of the cone where some of it sticks to the stigma. We tend to think of reproduction in terms of mammals such as ourselves. One egg plus one sperm equals one offspring. We also tend to think of the fruit of the tomato as being the offspring, but that's incorrect. The tomato fruit is the enlarged ovary, and the seeds are the offspring. An unfertilized seed in the ovary is called an ovule. And each and every ovule requires 1 grain of pollen to fertilize it. That means a lot of pollen must reach the stigma in order to fertilize the multitude of seeds in a tomato. Once again, these details are important. As each ovule is fertilized, the ovary swells and grows to provide an ideal environment for each ovule to mature into a seed. The seed contains all the genetic information to grow the next generation of plants. This turns out to be very important to us as gardeners because the more fertile seeds there are, the bigger the ovary or tomato fruit gets to accommodate them. In other words, the more complete the pollination, the larger the fruit. So big tomatoes equal well-pollinated tomatoes. Okay, let's crawl up out of this rabbit hole and go down another one called growth habit. In the seed catalogs, you may have seen tomatoes referred to as determinate or indeterminate. And this refers to their growth habit. In the simplest terms, determinate varieties are annuals and have more compact vines and put on a lot of fruit over a period of about 30 days. Indeterminate varieties, on the other hand, are perennial. They have very long vines and only put on a handful of fruits at a time. but they continue to put on fruit all during their lifespan as long as the conditions are right. It stands to reason that fewer fruits on a larger vine are likely to make larger tomatoes than a lot of fruits on a more compact vine, provided that the fruits are both pollinated well. Now, you probably have all sorts of things going around in your mind. So if you want a lot of tomatoes, I should plant determinate varieties. If I want fewer, larger tomatoes, I should plant indeterminate varieties. But wait just a minute. If indeterminate tomatoes continue to bear fruit throughout their lifespan, won't they make more tomatoes in the long run? Well, there's a fly in the ointment. And the fly in the ointment is the temperature. Here in West Texas, it gets very hot in May. The temperatures in the latter half of May are often in the 95 to 100 degree range. If our temperatures were consistently below 85, like they are in southern Mexico, indeterminate varieties would continue to bear fruit year-round, and as the fruits were harvested, they would be replaced by new ones. Not so in West Texas. In the latter half of May, it gets too hot for reliable pollination, so fruit set will stop in the last 2 weeks of May, leaving you with just a few tomatoes. The same is true of determinate varieties. They will continue to set fruit until they run their course or until the temperature shuts things down. So the secret of growing big tomatoes. There really is not a secret to growing big tomatoes. We know that tomatoes have a narrow range in which they set fruit. So in order to produce tomatoes, they must be mature and in bloom when the temperature is in the correct parameters. And that is basically the months of April and October. Assuming that your transplants are about 6 weeks old at transplant, it takes about 30 days for the plants to mature and go into full bloom. With the thought in mind that you want your tomatoes to be mature and in full bloom on April 1st, you would need to plant on March 1st. And in the fall, I give them a little more time, and I plant on August 1st so that they mature in September. The average date of our last freeze in Midland is March 27th, and the average date of our first freeze is November 11th. As you can see, that's a problem. Another problem is that most nurseries don't have plants on March 1st or on August 1st. The first part of the solution to the problem is obtaining plants. For myself, that means starting my own seeds and growing the seedlings out. And if you're equipped to start your seeds and grow seedlings, that part of the problem is solved. To do that, it requires a dedicated space, a good heat mat with a control, and some good grow lights. Corner of a utility room, a breakfast nook, spare bedroom, or even a bathroom will work. You can easily start 50 seedlings on a 10-inch by 20-inch heat mat. They can grow for about 2 weeks in a 50-cell plug tray before having to move them to larger pots. I like to use 4.5-inch pots, and 50 seedlings in 4.5-inch pots will take up a 4-foot table or bench. That means that you must have adequate lighting to light a 4-foot table or bench. Starting seeds and growing seedlings. This is my propagation area, and it has good LED grow lights above, and at the far end there's a heat mat and a control. Mine is about 8 feet long and 2 feet wide. It's capable of growing out about 200 seedlings. This is the same bench with 50 tomato seedlings. As you can see, once you move the seedlings to larger pots, they take up a lot more room and still need a good light. So be sure to take that into consideration when you're planning your propagation space. There are other options like grow tents, which are a more vertical layout. And there's more than one way to get the job done. You don't have to have a greenhouse. Before I had a greenhouse, I used this homemade germination box. And as a general rule, the simpler it is, the more attention it takes. I had to raise the lid every morning and close it at night, depending on the weather. But as you can see, it grew good seedlings. Now, row cover is your friend. Row cover is the solution to the problem of frost protection. This is a photo of my tomatoes on February 26th. As you can see, the plants are staked, hoops and row covers are installed, and I installed a string of 150-watt light bulbs and a thermostat set to 50 degrees. I use Agribon AG19 row cover for 4 degrees of frost protection and 85% light transmission. Now, there are other options like AG30 for 6 degrees of protection and 75% light transmission. And there are even heavier row covers, but the light transmission falls off to 50%. It's a bigger problem in the wintertime. It's much more of a job to cover 9-foot tall vines in the fall. In past years, I've used lights and painter's tarps, and now I have a portable structure to support the row cover, and I use small 500-watt heaters. So set your goals. What your goals are will influence your planting choices. For example, we'd like to grow as many tomatoes as we can in the spring so that we can put them up for the winter. For that reason, we plant determinate varieties in the spring so that they will set as much fruit as possible in our April window. We usually have around 20 tomatoes per plant. In the fall, we plant indeterminate varieties, which in the cooler weather produce very large slicers to enjoy all on their own. I use a vibrating pollinating wand to help things along, and I think it really makes a significant difference. Now, you can do this. It takes a little extra work, but the payoff is substantial. If your goal is to be as self-sufficient as possible, having the capacity to start your own seeds and grow your own seedlings is an integral part of gardening, not only for tomatoes, but for any vegetables you wish to grow. Well, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon.